First, we're just going to start. Why don't you just tell us your name and why you are running pretty basically for Wilmette Village President?
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. It's nice to speak with you. I'm Joel Kurzman, and I'm running for village president. I'm a 16-year resident of Wilmette. Have thoroughly enjoyed my experience in the community and making the community better as I go. And it's been a great experience the last four years serving as village trustee. I have a real strong passion for service, and the village board has been a great outlet for me. And so I'm really excited at the prospect of being able to expand that role and take it to another level of leadership. So that's how I'd like to kick us off.
Okay. And being on the board, especially for the past year, is where I want to start. I know it's been an overwhelming year for a lot of village governments and people across the globe. But how would you grade Wilmette's response to the pandemic? And looking back, is there anything the board should have done differently?
So it's a good question. I mean, in some ways, like what else is on people's minds than right now trying to get back to normal. But the challenge with that question is it kind of puts you in a position of second guessing. And I think the village has done a really great job on the whole. Like, I guess the way I sort of view it is, who saw this coming? And I did not. But I think what happens though is it helps you demonstrate, you know, whose leadership, who steps up and why, and how do you respond to unforeseen challenges. And I think both the village as it's staffed has done fantastic in many respects. And then I think individually, I feel proud of certain things that I've done to be part of that. So, in hindsight, you could look at some things and judge it, but it probably wouldn't be fair. So I've highlighted some of my thoughts in a video I posted on Facebook Live that sort of get to some particulars. But I think the important thing as far as is to be a little bit charitable in understanding where people were coming from, especially early in the pandemic. Um, but just to recap some things briefly that I think the village has done really well was, initially to set up the community caretakers program. That was a great way. Neighbors helping neighbors is really a spectacular way to address a problem. I think the village has done a fantastic job budgeting. I mean, it's hard when your revenue all of a sudden just tanks to be able to maintain service levels. And the way we've been able to engage budgeting in real time, month to month, really demonstrates great work by staff. This pilot program that's now being rolled out for paramedics doing vaccinations, that I can't underscore enough how much hard work that went into that. And this is done somewhat on the fly because, as you know, we don't have a state certified health department. And so we've not been in a position to vaccinate the same way that Evanston, Skokie, and Oak Park have been able to. So, I feel like in that regard, the village really made some lemonade out of lemons. And, I really tip my cap on that front. So, those are just some top level thoughts about our response to the pandemic.
And unfortunately, the pandemic is ongoing, and it's had a major effect on not only people but businesses in the community. What else can the village do? Continued efforts, and if you were village president, kind of how would you lead continued efforts out of the pandemic?
No, that's a great question. I do think that we will have lingering impact of the pandemic for quite some time. I think it's important, though, to maintain a line of communication with our businesses. Like, for example, I'm open to the idea that additional assistance could be necessary to hold over businesses during this what will continue to be a turbulent time. So, I am all ears if the business community has ideas for how the village can be helpful. Um, Another thing that I've tried to focus in on is resident well-being, and For example, we did not measure or record the unemployment rate for Wilmette residents until I asked staff to do so. And I think that is just one metric, but I think it's important for the village board to have a sense of the community's well-being. We certainly knew the well-being and the challenges facing the business community. I really wanted to understand residents as well. And, I think that's an important way to measure things moving forward.
In your website, kind of in your bio, you describe that you've engaged residents more than anyone else on the board, including those who disagree. I would love to hear some examples of maybe how you've engaged more and maybe with someone you disagreed with.
Yeah, well, so when I write my community newsletter, I just have to tell you, first of all, I put a lot of care into it. And then I've got a really tough editor I got to get things through, and that's my wife. Okay, uh, so putting it together is tough, but then it's terrifying to hit send because you just never know what you'll get back. And people are often very gracious, so I don't want to paint a difficult picture, but some people use it as the opportunity to provide feedback, and I think it's great. But you just don't know what you're going to get. So, but an example is just how much dialogue I had with people around the ordinance on minimum wage and the ordinance on earned sick leave. I had, a number of people who really were towing the same point of view as all the other trustees, for example, and our village president, who were not wanting to provide that level of wages for folks, did not think that that rudimentary benefit of earned sick leave was, a standard that we should set as we live in relative levels of affluence. But that dialogue about what's the impact going to be on business, what's the impact going to be on employment for our teens, for example, any number of facets which I know and respect, and it certainly is in the discourse now. And you hear the discussions on federal level, discussions on the minimum wage, but that sort of granular dialogue about what it would do in our community, that was a great example where I had to explain myself and be very transparent about the fact that I was the only person on the village board voting the way that I did. And it kind of toughens you up a little bit. And but I think residents, more than anything, and I hope this comes across in how I am campaigning on it, is there are a lot of people who don't agree with me, but still like that process that I'm engaging people and asking what they think. And so a lot of these folks are voting for me, even though they don't agree with me. And I just consider that like the highest honor of all, because, it is about us as a community finding our way through things. A couple of other issues that I've worked on that aren't related to the newsletter, but I think are pretty significant, but like the gun safety issue that I shepherded through the Public Safety Committee and then enacted. It banned the concealed carry of firearms in establishments serving liquor. And, I brought together a wide range of stakeholders, including, staunch supporters of gun rights or gun advocates. So, um, you know, just the fact that we worked through those issues together and did so in a civil way, it shows me, one, that we're still capable of civil discourse in the village of Wilmette. And I think it also demonstrated to the public, those that were following it, that, I have the skill set and the sensibilities to be able to lead us through difficult conversations and to do so in a respectful manner.
Hmm. Moving to the business community, there are a couple large vacant storefronts or buildings in Wilmette. Carson's comes to mind, Treasure Island. Um, how do those get filled? What's the board's role, and how can they get those filled?
So I feel like you are reading my campaign material because, or you've been on some of the Zooms that that my supporters are putting together for me, because I talk a lot about that. Like I have three areas of emphasis that I think about with a would-be Joel Kurzman village presidency, and one of them is around economic development and storefront vacancies. I mean, the changing state of retail is something we can try to get our head around, but the piece that I'm just not okay with, and I don't think we should be passive actors in, is around vacancies. And this is maybe a little different than Eden's. I'll get to that, but there are other cases where landlords are finding some sort of benefit to keeping storefronts vacant, and we need to address that. I believe that vacancies are not just a sales tax issue, they're a morale issue. I feel like in particular, the Treasure Island vacancy has, very large pockets of our neighborhoods just really disappointed. And you have to go by that every day. The paper's not even all the way up. Is it up? Is it down? Are they doing something? Are they not? People went to Trader Joe's, and that's not going to happen. And so it really just is, it's a morale downer. And so I do think it should be a priority. I think the way we address this, though, is to just have stronger and more resources put towards economic development. And as I profile in my League of Women Voters, responses, we will have some turnover in staff upcoming, and this is a loss for us because we have some wonderful staff people who have an amazing history. But like when that time comes and we need to add or replace staff, that's a chance to, designate either new or a different perspective on economic development, maybe try something, a little bit bolder and more assertive. And, the possibilities, I think are great there. But none of that is to say that the village isn't busting its hump right now. Like, I am constantly asking and constantly hearing the progress that goes into trying to fill some of the high profile vacancies at Eden's Plaza. And it's not for a lack of effort. I just want to be explicit about that. So, and if you followed the land use committee meetings a couple of weeks ago, that's where people are, it seems like a lot of folks are honing in on Eden's Plaza as it would be location for a would-be cannabis dispensary. So, there's a lot in the mix there. And, I just think that, we have to focus on it and make it a priority because, both we need the sales tax and it just, our community doesn't feel right when we have vacancies and blight.
Sticking with that, you mentioned maybe some bolder strategies. Do you have any in mind right now of bolder strategies that may help fill those vacancies?
Well, so some of the research being done is, and this is not how I term, this is apparently a term in the field, but cannibalization studies. So, like, to what extent would putting retailer X in this location have impact on other stores of same retailer? And so, being able to use that information to make the pitch is an activity that is underway now. And I'm not exactly sure it's going to get it done, but it's an example of, as I assert as a village board member to staff about, we've got to try to fill this vacancy. That was one step that we are taking to try our best to court retailer X. And it's only going to be one of many approaches that I think will be necessary to get it done. But in terms to your question about what ideas do I have, I've actually had more ideas on the other side of town. I happen to think that we have not utilized our lakefront attractions to draw people into our downtown. We have a magnificent lakefront. If you go to Gilson Park on the weekends, it is just packed to the hilt with people who are from other places. And I'm not sure we've hung the welcome shingle out well enough and devised a strategy to get folks to our downtown or to Plaza del Lago or to 4th and Linden. Not only do we have the lakefront, but we have the Baha'i Temple. What a magnificent structure it is. People come from far and wide to visit it. Like, I don't see how we aren't like absolutely driving folks to our downtown. I also point out in conversations around economic development that we're not members of the North Shore Convention Bureau, Convention and Visitors Bureau. I believe we're the only municipality in the region that's not. So we miss out on collaborative efforts in the region that drive visitors. And, I think that these are all ideas worth exploring because I feel like we haven't really looked under every stone to bring as many people to our businesses as possible. So the more business you have, the more appealing you are to other would-be businesses. And so I think that's also part of the solution, is to maximize what we do have to an extent that we have not so far.
Okay. And you talked about this a little bit, you touched on it, but just to get your general thoughts, under the right conditions, um, are you in favor of recreational cannabis sales within town limits?
Well, so I don't have a problem with it from a social perspective. I think the problem I have with it right now that is in the process of resolving is what exactly is our financial opportunity? And and so, and I say that because I live less than 3/4 of a mile from the largest dispensary in the state, the one in Skokie. So, like, does the market bear out that you can do another dispensary in Wilmette and have it be, profitable? I certainly hear lines of argument that yes, there is, but I would want to have a better sense of that. And where I'm going with this is if you look at our budget, staff has identified a small structural deficit. And I think this is really important that we try to address this on the front end before it would become a bigger structural deficit. And, some of that is that we become, pretty reliant on non-recurring permit revenues from large projects on the lakefront, and it fills in the gaps on things. And so I think sometimes we sort of get lulled into, you know, you know, not pursuing a sustainable budget path as much as we could. But the great thing about it, and we have fantastic budgeting at the village on the whole, is they've identified it when it's just on the front end. So when I think about recreational cannabis, I would want to know the extent to which it would be a revenue generating source and how much, because if indeed it could solve our structural deficit or be part of an array of solutions that solves our structural deficit, then I would feel better about disappointing the 43% of voters in the village that had a problem with recreational cannabis. Because even if I don't, I really do respect the viewpoint of that 43%. I'd feel better about disappointing them if we knew we had mission and purpose in having a dispensary in the village. But those are my thoughts.
Okay. Um, Switching gears a little bit, public bodies really across the country are addressing and considering policies to address social equity, diversity.
Yeah.
So, have you, or how have you, and how will you strive to make Wilmette a more inclusive and equitable place?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, there is some cross pollination here with the League of Women Voters effort. But, on the campaign trail, I do share a little bit more bio than I did with you up front. And some of that is to just say that growing up where I did in San Francisco during the 70s and 80s, I was rarely around people who were like me. And so I've just been around diversity my whole life. And I feel like there are some certain soft skills and certain sensibilities that come from that where I'm just comfortable and appreciate all people and the value they bring. And so I do think just, excuse me, in just how I comport myself and the culture I would bring to the village board. Excuse me, I'm having some sort of Marco Rubio moment or something. Um, so I do think that, I could play a role just in and of my own life skills and experience to make a difference with that. But on a public policy front, I think some of the previous comments I made around, um, driving folks from our lakefront, for example, to our downtown businesses, I happen to think that the more time people spend with us, the more they'll want to live here. And so if we can make sure that people of all, diverse people feel like they're welcome to spend time in the village, I think there's a good chance they'll want to live here. I think that'll get augmented by having, and I'm hoping we can recruit some real strong minority owned businesses, even just a couple of pillars of the community, um, really sends a message that, like, for people's stakeholding and sense of belonging. And I think that's a real important step as well. Um, I think also our frontline staff, our police, our fire, right now, I think the mindset kind of is it needs to reflect our community now, our demographics now. And I think it's worth considering trying to have a mind shift to our staff and our frontline, how we represent needs to reflect society at large and make that as welcoming as possible too. And just by virtue of it reflecting, diverse people. So I think that those sort of things, they're intangible, but I think it helps send a message. And I think one of the faster things that we will see if we can be more welcoming in that way is, I happen to think that a lot of people in diverse populations uh, can afford a market rate home in Wilmette, but they choose to go somewhere else. So, like, if we can sort of turn that around so that anybody who could afford a market rate home would just simply not write off Wilmette, but go, hey, that's a great place to live, that they could move here tomorrow, and that would be to the good. And then the last piece, though, I think that's super important is around affordable housing. And there are plenty of folks who can't afford to buy a market rate home in Wilmette, and that's really important too. And so, with our reformulated housing commission, we have a great opportunity to sort of revisit our policy on it. And the way that I describe it to people is, I'm looking for a portfolio of affordable housing options. We're sort of doing the single family thing now, with the land tracts from Optima, and that's good. We've got the HODC building at Ridge and Wilmette Avenue. That's good. But we've somehow managed to avoid having any multifamily units downtown, where our groceries and where our transportation is, and the lower sort of wage working opportunities. Somehow we've missed the mark on that. So I that surely has to be part of the toolkit moving forward. But again, I sort of view it as a portfolio of housing, affordable housing options. So, do I get to make these decisions on my own? No, of course not. But that's what's really exciting about how we finally got our housing commission and human relations commissions back up and running. Finally, okay, because some of us have been advocating for that for a very long time. And I'll just say that many of us didn't need to have, you know, the George Floyd murder and ensuing civil unrest to make that realization. These have been needs for our community for some time. I'm just really glad that we're finally getting there.
Um, Switching gears to kind of a social and entertainment question. I know that Wilmette is about to celebrate the big 150 birthday. I'm just curious, what are your ideas on how Wilmette can celebrate and how they should celebrate?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think that any sort of anniversary landmark is a good time to kind of reflect. Um, and so I think of it, maybe it speaks to my personality, but we have a committee set up that will sort of work on how we will celebrate. But I feel like a really important part of it is to reflect and, see where we've come from, and, I think that is also a chance to re-energize and sort of see where we want to go from here. Um, and when I reflect, I see, a history that's challenged in all the ways that, I know, for example, you've seen the Wilmette Historical Society's online exhibit. There have been challenges in the past. There's been growth. There's been, the creation of a really wonderful community. We're constantly we're in a process of perfecting it. I guess that's sort of where I see a lot of my candidacy is trying to take us to that next level, trying to perfect our community. So, you can see the challenges in the past, the things we've done well, the things we can learn from. And I really think that's the re-energizing that takes place. I'm going to leave it to the committee to decide how to celebrate. But I want to have a more cerebral approach to it and just, learn, reflect, and appreciate.
Um, Thinking about your opponent, Senta, who you work on the board with, she's announced endorsement by a few current and former village officials, including the last two village presidents. Why do you think that is, and how do you overcome it?
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not over, there's nothing to overcome. Um, I'm not seeking endorsements. I didn't 4 years ago, and all those same folks, were supporting the other candidates 4 years ago, and we overcame it then, and we'll overcome it now. Um, I'm not sure that's a successful strategy, to be honest. I think residents are increasingly wary of endorsements. It feeds the impression that, we have basically the trustee seats in the village presidency handed off. And I think most people in the village think that these, seats should be earned. There should be a marketplace of ideas. People need to work hard to demonstrate their ethic of service and whatnot. And I think people are really much more interested in my leadership and track record than they are in a list of endorsements. I think it also sort of feeds the impression that, that there's balance missing on the board, that we have the same kind of folks coming from the same social circles, from the same concentrated neighborhoods. And, this isn't necessarily reflective of the village at large. It has done well for some of the village, quite well, but my proposition is, and it's resonating with people, is this has got to be a village that serves all of its residents really well, and it's in our power to do it. And that's really kind of, when you hear you know my campaign, it's about leadership for all of Wilmette. And I've got the track record to prove my worth on those on that. So that's how I'm running the campaign, and I think it's going to work well for me.
Okay, Joel, that was that. Those were the questions I had for you. Is there anything else you want to talk to the voters about?
Um, you know, I do want to speak a little bit about leadership and track record. Um, it's not an easy thing to be village president. Sometimes you have to stand up for things and stand up to people, to interests, and it's not an easy thing to do. You also need to be able to work issues and know the difference between an issue that takes just a little bit of time and something that takes a long time. And I've demonstrated, an ability to differentiate. To know me on stormwater is not to know me on gun safety, is not to know me on minimum wage. I just think that, if you look at the track record of my engagement on the four issues that I ran on 4 years ago: stormwater management, pedestrian and vehicular safety, an area of priority I intend to continue as village president, intergovernmental cooperation and transparency with public engagement, you know, I've really been able to fulfill those promises and more. And I think people are really recognizing that. So I think that's what's generating a lot of interest. You know, and so I appreciate people's recognition of our success in that way, and people realize that that's a predictor of the future. And so, working with residents, getting things done, moving this village forward, that's really the name of the game in this election. And I'm uniquely capable of doing that. So I just appreciate people's consideration, and I appreciate their vote, and I appreciate local media. So kudos to you for trying to get this operation off the ground, and to serve the community. So you're trying to fill a void, and I feel akin to that. So certainly wish you good luck as you grow the publication.
I really appreciate that, Joel. I do have one more question. It's a fun one.
Okay.
Um, what's your favorite favorite meal at a Wilmette spot?
Oh, uh, well, so I have to, at least from a family perspective, got to throw in, you know, AO Sushi. We do a lot of takeout from AO Sushi, and so I'd put that up there. And when I'm in that vicinity, it's hard to say no to Louisville Malnati's. We have a soft spot for that as well. But yeah, I'd have to kind of give it to AO Sushi right now.